This is the one I promised you in episode 1. This is the one that a lot of you have been telling me you've been waiting for. I said then that Scotland's national animal was a unicorn, and that the jury was still out on Nessie, and that both of those things deserved an episode of their own. Then episode 8 turned into the Tartan Army's antics in America, which was the right call, but here we are now. The myths, the legends, the creatures, the folklore. All the strange and brilliant and occasionally quite disturbing things that the people of this country have been imagining for centuries. I'm going to lay my cards on the table here. I don't believe all of what I'm about to tell you about. Some of these stories are fanciful in the extreme, and I'll say so where it's relevant. But that doesn't mean I disbelieve all of it either. Just because I've not personally encountered something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I've never seen the bottom of Loch Ness, but I'm pretty sure it's there. I've not walked every glen in Scotland at night, so I'm not in a position to make a categorical statement about what's lurking out there, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Before we really delve into today's episode, I want to tell you about something I wear every day. Around my neck right now is a silver pendant, a birthday gift from my husband James, from a Scottish jewellery maker, and it goes with me everywhere, on tour, at home, every single day without exception, and it's a kelpie. Now, most guests who notice it on tour can't immediately identify what exactly it is. It looks something between a horse and a serpent, which is because essentially that's what it is. And when they ask what it is and I explain, the kelpie, the water horse, the myth, all of it, the reactions are split fairly evenly. Some people are intrigued and want to know more. Some people are confused why I would wear such a thing, and some are quietly horrified, looking at me wearing a mythological creature that drowns people as a fashion choice. And I can see them in real time assessing both me and probably their choice of tour guide. I stand by it entirely. It's a beautiful pendant, and if you're ever going to Scotland, you should understand what a kelpie is. Consider this episode part of your preparation. I'm Lesley Kennedy. This is Everything Scotland. Settle in. We're going somewhere considerably stranger than usual. Okay, so Nessie first, because if I don't do Nessie first, everyone's going to spend the whole episode just waiting for Nessie. So here we go. The Loch Ness Monster. Anne Nishak in Scots Gaelic. Or my version of it, I'm still learning, so bear with me. She's Scotland's most famous mythological creature, and possibly one of the most famous in the world. And I'm going to tell you exactly where I stand, which is where I have always stood, which is, I genuinely, honestly, and even after multiple visits to Loch Ness and considerable time thinking about it, just don't know. And here's why. Loch Ness is one of those places that no photograph can ever really prepare you for. Most Scottish lochs have clear water. You can look down and in some cases see the bottom. If not the bottom, then you can see the rocks, the weeds, and the fish if there are any there. Loch Ness is completely different. The water is dark. Not murky, not dirty, dark. The peat content turns it almost black. When you look out at it, you cannot see a single thing below the surface. It just goes down and down, and whatever is underneath is completely invisible. And then there's the scale. 23 miles long, 750 feet deep in places. It stretches away from you in both directions and disappears into the distance. The mountains on the far shore are not small mountains, and the loch dwarfs them anyway. You feel very, very small standing next to it. So when people ask me if I believe in Nessie, this is what I think about. Because I can't tell you what's in that water. Nobody can. It's too vast and too dark. The honest answer to any question about what Loch Ness contains is, we don't know. And we don't know is not the same as nothing's there. Anyway, the history, because the stories about Nessie aren't anything new. The first recorded account of something lurking in Loch Ness dates back to 565 AD, when St Columba reportedly encountered a beast in the River Ness, and he commanded it to go back, and back it went. Whether that tells you more about the creature or about St Columba's authority in the matter is a personal interpretation. The modern story begins in 1933. A local couple saw something large crossing the road near the loch, and the story hit the newspapers, and expeditions followed. The famous 1934 surgeon's photograph, the long neck above the water, turned out 60 years later to be a toy submarine with a sculpted head attached. Which is devastating for the myth, but also hilariously funny and slightly impressive. I mean, someone built a model for a hoax in 1934 and went to the lengths of using a submarine. I love a good practical joke, so I can't entirely disapprove of the commitment involved in carrying this one out. In 2019, a DNA study of the loch found over 5,000 species. No large unknown reptile, but a very significant amount of eel DNA. The current scientific theory is that Nessie sightings might be giant eels, or ordinary eels doing eel things in ways that look slightly alarming from a distance. Can you believe it? Scotland's most famous mythological creature, beloved across the world, generating £50 million in tourism revenue annually, might be an eel. I find this hilariously funny and somehow slightly fitting. If she is an eel, she's the most economically productive eel in the history of the world, and she deserves our respect regardless of what she actually is. While we're on the subject of creatures that live in Scottish water, it brings us nicely on to the kelpies, which I mentioned at the start and I now need to actually explain before anyone starts genuinely worrying about me. A kelpie is a shape-shifting waterhorse, a supernatural creature found in Scottish lochs and rivers that most commonly appears as a beautiful horse near the water's edge. If you are foolish enough to get on its back, and people in these stories always are, without exception, foolish enough to get on its back, which is how the story works, it drags you into the water and drowns you. I love horses. I am absolutely one of the people in that story. The kelpie would have had me in the loch before I even had a chance to consider my choices. The pendant is possibly my only defence against my own better judgment, should I ever find myself near a loch and a beautiful horse. Some versions add that it eats most of you afterwards, leaving only your liver on the bank. And I've thought about this detail more than is probably healthy, and I can't really work out why the liver specifically. It's an oddly precise piece of ancient folklore. Someone at some point made a very deliberate decision about the liver, and I would genuinely love to know the reasoning. My personal theory, and I'm aware this might be just based on my own personal experiences, but here we go. My theory is that as a wee baby kelpie, she had a Scottish granny who every week made liver and onions for dinner and forced her to eat it. Now, as a grown up, she's officially rejecting the liver and leaving it on the banks of the loch, where it actually belongs. Because let's be honest, nobody really wants to eat liver, not even a supernatural waterhorse. The kelpie can also appear as a person, typically a handsome young man soaking wet and hanging about the edge of a loch. And look, a dripping wet stranger loitering by the side of a body of water should, by any modern standard, already be a fairly significant red flag. You should not need ancient folklore to tell you this situation requires caution. And yet, the stories are full of people who walked right up, struck up a conversation, and presumably thought, yep, this is fine, completely normal what's happening here. And it wasn't fine. It was not normal. If you're ever in this situation, soggy stranger, loch side, suspiciously attractive, Do not approach. Do not ask if they are all right. Do not offer them a towel. Just turn around and walk in the opposite direction, at a pace that is brisk but does not suggest you have panicked, and don't look back. Scotland has been trying to tell people this for centuries. Please be the person that listens. So, I hear you ask, why do you wear such a horrible creature around your neck? And this is a question I get asked quite a lot, usually with an expression that's trying hard to be polite about what's being thought, which is what's actually wrong with you. The answer is, I find kelpies genuinely fascinating. Not frightening, more fascinating. Think about what it actually is. It's a creature that looks like the thing you want most, appearing in exactly the right place at the right moment, and it will absolutely destroy you if you're not paying attention. That's not just ancient Scottish folklore. That's a warning that has been relevant in every century since someone first told it. Scotland wrapped a universal truth about beauty and danger in the shape of a horse and has been passing it around campfires for thousands of years. Don't you think that's extraordinary? And I personally think that such a creature deserves much better than being reduced to a gift shop fridge magnet. So, here we are. And if any actual kelpies happen to be listening, the pendant is a gesture of professional respect, and I would appreciate it being treated accordingly, should we ever meet. In 2013, 2 enormous steel horse heads were unveiled at the Helix Park in Falkirk. 30 metres tall each, 300 tonnes apiece, the largest equine sculptures in the world. They were created by the sculptor Andy Scott, and here's the thing I love about them. They're not just a nod to mythology, they're based on the Clydesdale horses that actually worked the canal system in the area, hauling boats along the waterways for generations. The name Kelpies was chosen to represent the transformation of the landscape. The same waterways, same ground, but reimagined. The working horses of the past becoming the mythological water horses of the ancient stories. Old history and older mythology meeting in 30 metres of steel in Falkirk. Isn't that brilliant? I've been to the Kelpies more times than I can count, and they've never once failed to stop me in my tracks. You approach them and they just keep getting bigger and bigger, and you think you've adjusted to the scale, and then you're underneath them and you realise that you've completely miscalculated. 30 metres of steel horse looking at you, the light on the steel at different times of the day, the sheer physical presence of them. Andy Scott took something ancient and dangerous and dark and made it catch the light. The Kelpies are one of my favourite things in Scotland, and I say that as someone who has a lot of favourite things in Scotland and takes the competition seriously. While we're on the subject of things in Scotland that are not what they appear to be, I need to talk about the Faeries. And before I do, I need you to put down whatever you're currently picturing. Wings, flowers, small friendly lights, the Tooth Fairy, Tinkerbell, all of that. Put it down. We're not doing any of that today. Scottish fairies are not small, and they're definitely not decorative. They're not interested in being charming for your benefit. They are ancient, powerful, unpredictable, and offended by casual disrespect in ways that have historically had serious consequences. The tradition of leaving offerings for them, milk on the doorstep, cream, the first of the harvest, was not a quaint cultural ritual. It was considered risk management, sensible, calculated, based on a clear understanding of what tended to happen to other people who didn't bother. There are 2 courts of Scottish fairies, the Seelie and the Unseelie. The Seelie, which comes from the Scots word for blessed, will occasionally help you. Note the word occasionally. They are not reliably benevolent. They have their own rules, their own moods, and their own reason for doing things that may have absolutely nothing to do with your welfare. They can warn you of danger, but they can also ruin your harvest because you get something wrong that you didn't know was a thing. They're a force of nature that operates in your favour sometimes. Sometimes is the most you can expect. The Unseelie don't have a sometimes. The unseelie are consistently, reliably hostile. They travel at night in a mass, attacking travellers, carrying people off, causing illness in people and livestock. There's no negotiating with the unseelie. The recommended protective measure, if you encounter them, is to turn your coat inside out and get inside as quickly as possible. Now, the thing I find most interesting about Scottish fairies, the thing that gets completely lost when people assume they are the sweet, decorative kind, is how different they are from the English version. The English fairy tradition, shaped by Shakespeare and by Victorian illustrators, by 2 centuries of enthusiastic domestication, gave us something rather lovely actually. Friendly, magical, essentially harmless creatures who'll grant wishes and leave coins under pillows, guide lost children home, and generally conduct themselves as benevolent supporting cast of a children's story. The kind of thing that ends up on nursery wallpaper. Sweet little beings of light and goodwill, bringing wonder and warmth to anyone lucky enough to encounter them. Enchanting, delightful, completely safe. Scottish fairies, they steal children. They leave a changeling, a fairy child or an enchanted object where the human baby was. They lure people into fairy mounds where time moves differently and you emerge to find everyone you loved has been dead for hundreds of years. In certain parts of Scotland, road construction projects have been rerouted to avoid disrupting known fairy sites because the locals considered the risk genuinely not worth taking, and the contractors apparently agreed. Scotland's fairies are not here to help you. They were here first and then you moved in, and the best outcome is a respectful coexistence based on terms that are largely theirs. That's considerably more interesting and considerably more honest than just a wish. Though I should say, because I don't want to leave you with the impression that everything in Scottish mythology is entirely hostile, not everything is trying to drown you or steal your children. There are occasional exceptions. Enter the brownie. A brownie is a household spirit, a small scruffy creature that attaches itself to a particular house or farm and does all the work while you sleep. That's it. That's its whole thing. Scotland invented a scruffy wee man who sleeps all day and comes out at night to finish your chores. I love this. I love it completely and without reservation. The idea of a small, slightly dishevelled creature who waits until the house is quiet and then gets up and does the threshing and finishes the spinning and sweeps the floors and sorts everything out before morning. This speaks to something very deep in the soul of anyone who has ever looked at a pile of unfinished tasks at 10 o'clock at night and thought, I just can't, not tonight, I genuinely just can't. The brownie has your back. You can go to sleep. Now I think it's important to tell you that a brownie has standards. The brownie is not a servant. He's a proud wee creature who has chosen to help you. And that distinction matters enormously to it. You can leave it small offerings, a bowl of cream, a bit of porridge, something modest. This is accepted and greatly appreciated. What you can't do is make the offering feel like a payment. That's way too formal, too transactional, and the brownie will notice, because brownies are proud creatures. Disproportionately so, some might say, for something you could fit in a shoebox, and they will not be reduced to the status of an employee. And under absolutely no circumstances do you give a brownie a gift of clothing. A brownie giving clothing will leave, immediately and permanently, because clothing absolutely means payment, and payment means employment, and a brownie will not be employed. It will not clock in, it will not fill in a timesheet. It helps you out of respect and pride, and the particular satisfaction of a small scruffy creature that does good work. And the moment you reduce that to a transaction, it picks up whatever brownies pick up. I've genuinely never found a satisfying answer to what that could be. And it walks out the door, never to be seen again. And if you mistreat it, mock it, criticise it, consistently disrespect it, the brownie transforms into a boggart. Same creature, completely different mode. The boggart breaks things. hides your belongings, sours the milk, ruins the bread, and is generally the worst possible house guest. The version you get is determined entirely by how you treat the one you have. I think about the brownie sometimes when I'm tired and the house is a mess and there are 70 things that I still haven't done or had time to do, and I think, somewhere in Scotland that still believes in these things, there's a small, scruffy creature waiting patiently to help, asking only for a bit of porridge and the dignity it deserves, and I wish I had one of my own. So if you ever find yourself in possession of your own brownie, treat it with care, treat it with respect, but whatever you do, don't try to dress it. Right, affectionate interlude over, because Scotland's mythological range goes considerably beyond helpful wee creatures who do the dishes, and I think you should know what else is out there. Scotland has its very own answer to the vampire. They are called the Bavanshi, beautiful women who appear to travellers at night and offer to dance before draining their blood. They wear green dresses, long enough to conceal the fact that where their feet should be, there are deer hooves. If you're a traveller at night and a beautiful woman appears and offers to dance for you, check the hem of the dress. I genuinely can't believe that this needs to be said out loud in the 21st century, but the mythology suggests that people have historically needed the reminder. Then there's the Benia, the washing woman, found at streams at night, washing the bloodied clothing of people who are about to die. If you see her, that clothing might be yours, or someone close to you. She's not causing the death, she simply knows it's coming. She is the announcement, not the cause. But that doesn't make encountering her any more pleasant, and I appreciate that. There is a tradition that if you can get between her and the water before she sees you, that she must grant you a wish. Scottish mythology is remarkably consistent on this. Even in the presence of a death omen, there are angles worth exploring. The Scottish response to seeing a woman washing your funeral clothes is apparently, let's see what we can get out of this. I find this deeply characteristic and completely plausible. The Wulver from Shetland, which, as we noted in episode 7, has more Norse character to its tradition, and the Wulver reflects this entirely. Man's body, wolf's head, lives in a cave near a loch, and it fishes, and it leaves the fishes on the windowsills of poor families who need feeding. That's it. That's the Wulver. It's not threatening anyone, not luring anyone to the water, not doing anything alarming whatsoever, just out there in the dark, fishing and making sure the hungry get fed. Scotland produced a wolfman philanthropist from Shetland who just wants to help, and he deserves considerably more recognition than he gets. And I'm here to champion him. The Blue Men of the Minch. The Minch is a stretch of water between the Outer Hebrides and the mainland. Wild, cold, extremely unforgiving. It's inhabited by blue-skinned men who sleep on the waves and wake when a storm comes. They approach ships and shout rhymes at the captain, and if the captain cannot complete the couplet, they capsize the vessel. The sea is trying to drown you via unfinished poetry. And I want to give this a moment because I think it deserves one. At some point in the history of these islands, someone looked at the dangerous, storm-tossed waters of the Minch and identified the cause of the shipwreck as blue men who demand you finish their rhymes. This is either the most Scottish explanation for a maritime disaster I've ever heard, or a completely sincere account of something in the water that communicates in verse, and both of these options alarm me in slightly different ways. And finally, the Nuckalevy. I saved this one to last because it is, without question, the most disturbing creature on the list, and I want you to be at least slightly prepared. The Nuckalevy comes from Orkney, and it lives in the sea. It comes ashore to bring plague and drought and destruction, and it has no skin. Not thin skin, not damaged skin, no skin at all. Every muscle, every vein, every sinew, everything that would normally be inside the body, all visible, all moving, nothing covering any of it. The Arcadian accounts describe it in considerable detail, and I'm going to spare you most of the detail because, well, you might be listening to this at night time, and I want you to be able to sleep. What I find most telling is this. The people of Orkney, who have lived inside a mythological world already rich enough for several podcasts, identified the Nuckaleve as the thing they genuinely didn't want to meet. Out of everything. When a community that already has all of this draws a line at something and says, that one, that's the information worth taking seriously. The only protection from an Nuckaleve is running water, same as a kelpie. Whether that is reassuring or alarming depends on how much running water you have access to at any given moment. In Scotland, there's generally quite a lot. This is perhaps why we're all still here. Right, on that note, something considerably more cheerful. Before we get to the Scots Word of the Week, I'm going to do a listener story and a couple of things from guests on tour this week, because they're too good to keep to myself. The story is from Susie in Idaho, and she says, a friend asked me to look up some genealogy information about her family while I was visiting Scotland. Although I agreed, I didn't really want to spend my entire holiday doing research. But in my quest, I learned actually quite a lot. The Scottish people are the kindest and most hilarious folks you will ever meet. At Stirling Castle, I asked one of the staff about the family name and ended up listening to the most beautiful story about her family. I asked at a pub, and many pints later, I didn't know any more than when I walked in, but I had laughed until I nearly peed my pants with the lovely local people. I've been going to Scotland for almost 25 years, and it has been one glorious adventure after another. Susie, I love that, especially the pub detail. Many pints, no genealogy, nearly an accident, and 25 years coming back. That's what Scotland does to you. It gets under your skin. You went in with a question and come out with something so much more. You come out with stories to tell. Now I've got a couple of stories from people I was actually on tour with, because they tie in really beautifully to this week's episode. The first one was when we were out and I was explaining the Kelpies to a group. We went through it all, the water horse, the drowning, the liver detail, the whole kit and caboodle, and there was a pause, and one of the women in the group looked at me and said, "And your husband gave you that for your birthday?" It wasn't really a question, it was more of an assessment. And I said, "Yeah." Her next question was, "Why would he give you such a thing?" And I had to then explain it was because it was what I had asked for, and it wasn't some evil talisman he was trying to hang around my neck. The second creature that came up in conversation this week was the brownie, and to a completely different group. I was telling them about how it does all your chores, and the only thing you need to give it in return is a wee bit of porridge. And one of the guys in the group, completely straight-faced, looked at me and says, "Man, where can I buy one of those?" And I said, "You can't," and he looked genuinely disappointed. The rest of the group looked genuinely disappointed too, and honestly, I understand, because who wouldn't want a brownie of their own? But that's entirely the point of the brownie. Scotland invented the thing we all secretly need, and then made it available only to the people it decides deserves it, which is exactly the kind of thing Scotland would do, and I mean that as a compliment. And that brings us on to your Scots Word of the Week. And this week, it's eerie. E-E-R-I-E. Eerie. It comes from the Scots, where it means uneasy. That particular unease of the supernatural. Not frightened of something you can see. Frightened of something your instincts register before your brain is caught up. The feeling of a place that is old and dark and not quite empty. Scotland is a very eerie country. It comes by it honestly. The landscape is old, the history is long, and the people who lived here decided, over a very long time, that there were things in the water and the hills in the dark that were worth explaining and worth respecting. Tonight, I hope you understand a little of why, and I hope you remember the coat rule. That one's really important. Next week on Everything Scotland, we leave mythology entirely and go somewhere the drama needs absolutely no embellishment. Mary Queen of Scots. Crowned Queen of Scotland at 9 days old, Queen of France at 16, 3 marriages, each more complicated than the last, imprisoned, escaped, recaptured, 18 years in English captivity, executed at 44 on the orders of her own cousin, who had spent 19 years trying to avoid signing the warrant and eventually ran out of reasons. It's one of the greatest stories in Scottish history, possibly the greatest, and unlike everything in tonight's episode, every single word of it's true. If you're enjoying Everything Scotland, please subscribe and leave a review, and find us at Everything Scotland Official on social media. And if you have a Scotland story or a strange experience near a Scottish loch that tonight's episode has caused you to reassess, send it in. I'd love to hear it. I'm Lesley Kennedy. This is Everything Scotland. Slanjava. And P.S. Stay away from attractive strangers near water. You have been warned. Again.